Today we're gonna do some exercise and I'm gonna show you why you don't need a gimbal when you have the GH5. My gimbal went broken and it kind of gave me some constraints, but I'm hesitant on buying a new gimbal for I kind of like constraints. I like all kind of constraints because those will make me a more creative problem solver. And I have been trying to mimic gimbal movements with the setup that I'm using now. This is a monopod and the GH5, and I have found out that I can get almost as good stabilization with this monopod and the sensor stabilization as I could with a normal or like a proper gimbal. Though there's some limitations or some cons, but there are a couple of pros as well. So what does a gimbal do? Gimbals remove three kind of movement from your footage, so it basically stabilizes your footage. The first, gimbals remove the micro jitters, then they remove these jerky motions, and third, they remove this wavery big motions. So there's three types of motion that gimbals remove. So how to remove all of these kind of types without the gimbal? First, the micro jitters is the sensor stabilization will remove most of them, almost all of them. And then when we add the monopod, it will remove almost all of the jerky motions. By adding the monopod to the camera, it will give the camera more inertia, so it's moves slowly, so it doesn't so easily jerk. And when we add warp stabilization in post, in Premiere Pro or After Effects, it will remove the rest of the micro jitters or the jerky motion. And then we are only left with this big wavery motion, and I will show you how to remove that in After Effects. So, how to use a monopod as a gimbal instead of a gimbal? Well, basically, it's the same thing as if you would be shooting without a monopod, just handheld. Just try to hold the camera as gently as possible, like it would be some kind of a small bird on your feathery hand or something. And the same thing applies when you have the monopod on, though it gives more stability. It prevents the camera from rotating around, so it's easier to stabilize it, but still the same thing applies. Try to hold it very gently. And then the third thing is that if you want to shoot very low angles, just flip the camera around and there you go, you can shoot near to the ground. And now that you have the camera on your hand, you can adjust focus while you're shooting or exposure or whatever, because if you do it gently, the camera doesn't shake, it doesn't affect the stabilization. And then there's one other plus, that you can use it a bit like a crane. So having the gimbal's leg to the ground, you can lift the gimbal up, just like a crane. And one more thing about stabilization, and this applies to even people who use gimbals. When you're moving the camera, try to avoid this kind of bounce movement that comes from your walking. So instead of walking like this, I'm exaggerating the movement, but you get the idea. Instead of try to walk like this. And again, I'm exaggerating the amount of, but you get the idea. Try to keep the camera floating in the air in a straight line, not this kind of motion, because you can really see that motion and it becomes annoying, even with gimbals. And I just wanted to add that I've noticed that I don't recommend using the ES lock when trying to mimic gimbal kind of movement, because the ES lock seems to kind of over-stabilize the footage, so it doesn't stabilize so well in post. Let's go to the computer and I'll show you what I do in post to increase the stability of the footage. Okay, here at the computer, let's see how smooth is the footage straight out of the camera. And you can see that the footage is rather steady. There is no micro jitters, but there's a bit of this the camera is kind of wobbling its head. So to remove that, let's apply the warp stabilization effect. And the warp stabilization, you can find it on effects and just apply it. And this effect will first analyze the footage. It will analyze how the camera is moving and then it will stabilize it. So let's give it time to analyze the footage. And if you don't have the fastest computer and you have high-res, high frame rate footage, this part will take some time, so be patient. And now that it has done the analysis, it will do the stabilization based on the analysis that it did. And here we can check it out. The footage is much better now. There isn't this wobbling, the head of the camera is not wobbling. But sometimes when we use this effect, like here you can see when this guy bobs into frame, we introduce a bit of warping. I don't know why the stabilization effect is called warp stabilization. Maybe it's because it sometimes introduces this warping effect. And the reason why we get sometimes this warping is the simple reason that the effect is unable to understand what happens in the frame. So for example, when this guy pops into frame, there's a bit of movement in his body, and the effect is trying to stabilize that movement. And because it's trying to stabilize the movement, the background starts to move. So the reason why we get warping is that we gave the analysis bad information to start with. And if you get warping, there's two ways to fix it. The first one is simple. Just lower the smoothness value here. It will be less aggressive when it tries to stabilize the footage. And for example, if we check this one out now, to my eye it seems that we don't have that warping anymore. But sometimes lowering the smoothness value is not enough. For example here, this clip right here that I started this video with, when we're looking at it, we can see that there's kind of like two layers. There's the foreground layer and there's the background layer. So the background layer has movement and this foreground layer, my body, has movement. So if we apply the warp stabilization effect, it introduces a lot of warping because it's trying to stabilize both of these layers at the same time, my body and the background. So if I don't want to stabilize my body, I just want to stabilize the background, I have to cut myself out. So to do that, I simply nest. So you double press, you click nest, and you nest the footage, and then you go inside the nested sequence, and here you apply a mask on top of the part that you don't want to be part of the analysis. And here I mask myself out. And if something is too complicated for you, please ask me in the comments and I'll try to explain better. But I want to go rather quickly. So I animated this mask on top of myself, kind of removing myself from the analysis part. And now when we go back here, and then we go back here and I run the analysis, I click analysis, and after the analyzing, I go back to the nested sequence, and then I turn off the mask. So I'm returning myself to the footage. I removed myself from the footage while I was doing the analyzing part, and after the analyzing part, I introduced myself back to the footage. And now we have footage that is not warping, as you can see. But there's still one thing that I find annoying with this footage that we would not get with the proper gimbal. And it's this, the horizon is kind of floating like we would be on a boat. And to be able to remove this horizon shifting, we have to use After Effects, and it's advanced magic. But here you can see an example of the horizon not shifting around. And here, next, here's an example of all of these different clips with different stabilization. Next, I'm going to go to After Effects, and this is going to be a rather advanced magic, so don't worry if you cannot follow along. If you use Premiere Pro and you use the warp stabilization and lower the smoothness value and do the masking when needed, you get really good footage already. But if you want to make it perfect, then follow along. So here on After Effects, I have one clip that I want to stabilize because, as you can see, the guy operating the camera was a bit sick or something because it's the horizon is really wobbling like this. We could fix the horizon shifting by manually adding keyframes to animate, like counter animate this rotation, but it will take a long time and the end result is not good. I have tried that. So we need a more precise and a faster method. So to remove the horizon shifting, we need one effect and one plugin. And the effect that we're going to use is this 3D camera tracker, but let's come back to that later. But we need one plugin, and the plugin is this Orient World plugin that you can get from aescripts.com. The link is in the description. It's 20 euros, 20 US dollars, though you can name your own price. But if you're going to use this for commercial purposes, please give them some support. Okay, back to After Effects. So then, to fix the horizon shifting, we start with the plain footage. So no color correction and no warp stabilization applied. And the first thing that we do is we right here to the effects panel, a 3D camera tracker, and we apply this 3D camera tracker effect. And this is done by the same team as that has done the warp stabilization effect, because we can see it has the same overlay. And this is a very special effect. This will analyze the footage as the warp stabilization effect will analyze the footage, and then it will create a virtual camera that moves exactly or tries to move exactly the same way as your real camera does in your footage. And I have already applied and already analyzed the footage, so let's just open this one. This is the same effect that I already applied. And now you can see these, let me make them bit bigger. You can see these tracking points, and these are all different points on the footage that the camera, this effect has tracked. And based on those, it has created a 3D space that has the same values as the real space that you shot the thing in. Anyway, there's a lot of tutorials on 3D tracking, so I'm not going to explain you that how this really works. But so let's just do this. So first, let's try find 3 points that are on the same level, on the floor or on the wall, and as far away from each other as possible. So let's pick this tracking point, and then let's pick this tracking point, and maybe let's choose this tracking point. And this triangle between these 3 tracking points appeared, and this round circle. And now we have the solid that is glued to the ground. And next, let's make sure that the square, the orange square, is perfectly aligned with the floor. So I'm going to add an effect called generate a grid to this solid. And then I'm going to scale it up. And then I'm going to rotate it. And let's see, it seems to be, yeah, it aligns perfectly with the floor, lines on the floor. So let's assume that it's straight. So we can check it out by checking the footage, and it seems to be glued to the ground rather well. So it means that we were able to resolve the 3D virtual camera rather well. So now this next part is really hard to understand and even harder to explain, and it took me a lot of trial and error to develop this method. But we have to next orientate the coordinate of the virtual camera so that this square, this solid that we created, sits flat on the ground. And to do so, we need that plugin that I showed you. So we go to the window, and we open this Orient World plugin. And here we have the solid selected, and then we choose the wall. And now the coordinates of the world should be kind of straightened out. And to make sure that it's so, go to this camera that has been created, and then press R and click the orientation value, and then click the graph player. And here you can see that, and the blue line here is the horizon shifting. So as you can see, the horizon was shifting like this, and this blue line represents that shifting. If the blue line goes up, or it goes up and then comes down, then you have done something wrong. So try to do it again. So select a solid, and maybe click the Orient World and choose some other settings here. For example, if you're using a wall, instead of having the solid on the ground, you have it as a wall, then you have to choose some other settings and just tweak them around. It took me a while to figure this out as well. But here you can see that this blue line is, the average of the blue line is horizontal. It's not increasing, or it's not going up and coming down. So then we know that it's okay. So next we're going to do the magic part. And now we're going to use the information from the 3D track that we made that is embedded in the camera object. We're going to use that information to counterbalance the movement of the footage. So to do so, just turn off both of this camera and the track solid. Then make this footage layer, make it a 3D object by clicking this box icon. Then press R. And I'm not going to explain why, because I have still trouble understanding it myself. So I cannot really explain if I don't understand it myself. Just tag along. So press R, and then press Alt and the stopwatch icon. So click the Z rotation. Just click the stopwatch icon. And before you go there, actually turn off the graph editor. So go back to the normal editor. And then press Alt and the stopwatch icon. And then click this big quick icon and go and grab the last value of the orientational value of the camera. And then click somewhere else. And now the footage, the horizon is stabilized, as you can see. The camera, the footage stays straight, even though the camera is moving. But now it's, well, vertical. So then use this other orientation value and make it straighten it out. And let's see, like there, and voila, we should have straightened out footage. And as you can see, that the footage stays straight. Now the camera stays straight, but you still might have some rotation when the camera pans or tilts. And the reason why it happens is that you have not been able to orientate the world perfectly. So if you have this rotation when the camera pans or tilts, go back to the solid and make it bigger, scale it up, and try to align it perfectly with the floor or with the wall. You have to have a bit of 3D eyes to be able to see when it's correct. But just go back there and try to align it perfectly. And then orientate the world with the plugin again. But still, after a couple of attempts, if you're not able to make the world coordinate correct and the camera is still panning, still rotating when you're panning or tilting, you can easily go and manually remove the rest of the rotation with keyframes. Because now it's kind of the rotation is much more smoother. It's not anymore this kind of a fast rotational shift, more like smooth motion, so it's easier to fix with animated keyframes. Okay, if you're still with me, congratulations. You must be some kind of an After Effects wizard to understand this. Anyway, so then, now that we have fixed the horizon, then we'll go and select all these layers and we'll click Pre-Compose and let's give it a name, Horizon. So let's apply the warp stabilization to stabilize the rest of the footage. So again, warp stabilizer, and then, okay, now it's stabilized the footage. And as you can see, we still have these borders because there's so much horizon shifting. So we still have a lot of these borders coming into the frame. So to fix that, let's just scrub through the footage and let's find a clip where the borders are most visible. So let's say, for example, here it looks that they are rather visible. So then I just click the layer and press S and I zoom. So I'm adding an additional crop to the footage. I'm zooming in so that the rest of the frames are not visible anymore. And then let's check it out if we still see some of the borders. And yeah, looks like we got rid of them. So okay, there you have it. Very complicated way of stabilizing the horizon in your footage. But this might save your skin in some projects. And if you made it this far, let me give you a couple of more tips. This method works well when you're using rather wide angle or medium angle lenses. This is not really good for telelenses because it's harder for After Effects to create the virtual camera from that. And another thing to consider is that if you want to be able to create this virtual camera to get the information for the horizon, you have to have stuff that stays still. So walls, floor, something that stays still. Because if for example, if you're shooting someone's face very nearby and there's a lot of movement in the face, After Effects is not able to create the virtual track. Though sometimes you might have a second chance on solving the 3D camera, the virtual camera from the footage. If you go to the Effects 3D camera tracker and to go here, toggle the Advanced tab and you click the Detailed Analysis box, then it will do a more proper analysis of the footage, and sometimes that might save your neck. So there we have it, a big complicated tutorial this time, but I hope it's useful for you in some point. And I want to tell you that making these tutorials takes a long time for me. Maybe it's my language, because English is not my native language, but I have so many ideas that I want to tell you. And now I don't have the time, but soon I will have much more time to dedicate on YouTube and for you guys. So subscribe and click the notification bell icon to be notified. And for example, I want to give you a sneak peek of a future episode. This is a color map or like color chart of different interior paints. This is from a local paint shop. These are free, at least I got them. I got these for free in Finland. And with this, I'm able to match Cine D with Vlog rather perfectly. Here's an example of Cine D and then Vlog, and now I match them together to have the same color. And you can with these you can match different color profiles or different cameras together. And what's most important, like most interesting, and with this you can fix white balance in post. Yes, that's correct. You can re-engineer the flexibility of raw photo with your videos with this. So stay tuned, click the notification bell icon, and if you want to test this yourself, if you want to try out the Cine D to Vlog transformation lookup table, you can join my Facebook Messenger list, and there's a download vault where you can download this transformation lookup table that I created using this, and you can use it do, well, maybe even skip upgrading to Vlog. So instead you can transform Cine D to Vlog, and maybe it will save you the hassle of buying Vlog upgrade and just use Cine D instead. So if you want to do that, go to the link. There's a link in the description for joining my messenger list, and you can download that there. Okay, I think that's all. See you in the next one. Bye.